So, Gert-Jan, welcome to the second episode of this podcast. Glad to have you, man.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.
We're in beautiful Berlin. This is the workshop day of the first CTI conference. You did a workshop today. How did it go?
It was amazing. People keep surprising me, and I'm always having a lot of fun here. So today was that.
Oh, I can imagine. Tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of your background and who you are and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot I can tell. What I think is the most useful for people is not exactly where I came from or how I grew up, but my professional background is more into. It started in a bit of security engineering, just implementing the technical solutions we see today, like firewalls, security authentication products, and all that. And through that period, I learned a lot about how complex these things are. But I've always been curious. I've always been busy with, why do these things happen the way they do? And through that process, I also learned that there's more on why we select certain solutions and why is that the case, and why do we make certain choices to why we do the things we do, basically. And that actually led me on a journey of moving from implementation work to consultancy work, where I basically helped a lot of teams and organizations develop security programs, implementation projects, more complex stuff. And at the time, there was a little report that came out, the APT-1 report.
Oh, yeah, that is.
Yeah, exactly. And that was a big driver for the CTI industry as a whole at the time. I mean, at the time, it was nothing new. It was already there for like a lot of years, as in intrusion analysis, but it really got mainstream in that period. So at that time, there was some people who thought it was a good idea to set up a team around that, a proposition, and I was fortunate enough to just jump on that train and keep going. And I could tell a bit more about how that went, but maybe some personal stuff about me as well. I was a stapelaar, as we called it in the Netherlands. I did my MBO and then HBO, and then I thought, let's go to university. Did not do that because I thought it was a good idea to just start working, just get some hands-on experience, just get started. Mm-hmm. I realized fairly quickly that in this cybersecurity world, you just have to have experience. Sometimes that trumps the academic route. I'm not saying the academic route is bad. I'm just saying that there's different levels of experience which will benefit you different ways.
Yeah.
I'm a big learner, lifelong learner. I love to figure out what's going on. I'm an entrepreneur, and I've always been interested in how these things work. And these two elements I just talked about, they also dictated how I continued my journey from consulting, leading CTI teams, and helping CTIs grow. That led me into an entrepreneurial route, which is absolutely, it's a roller coaster. I can tell you this. For everyone who wants to do it, go do it. It's just not for the faint of heart. And that's not because it's a bad thing, but it's just sometimes, you see these things on LinkedIn or whatever, and they just seem, so unique and perfect, and the 6 hour routine or whatever, all that stuff. But the thing is, that is not how it works. It is hard work every single day. And what I've learned over the last couple of years is that there's a lot of stuff I think that the industry should be doing, specifically the CTI industry, and I've been trying to capture that ever since.
Oh, interesting. What is that thing? Are we going to talk about that later?
We're gonna talk about that a lot.
Oh, but looking forward to it.
For this one, I just want to keep it at that. There's a lot of stuff also privately. I'm a big fan of contributing knowledge. I believe in information at scale. If there's an initiative I can work on with teams in the industry, volunteers, I'm always open on that. Tomorrow I'm privileged to actually share in a talk at the main stage and talk a bit about the framework called CTI CMM, for example, and talk a bit about how do we as an industry organize ourselves around something. And it doesn't matter what it actually is, a framework or whatever, but what matters is that you spend a portion of your time to improving the whole. And this is like I'm very interested in the things like systems thinking, looking at the broader picture, behavioral psychology, risk management, threat management, all that, and organizing and basic improvement.
And you're venturing into intelligence as well, aren't you? Because you post a lot about how to apply intelligence in some way, shape, or form. Not the main communication, but there's always some element of intelligence in your posting on LinkedIn and other places. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and that's also what I noticed in my journey from being a practitioner and going into like, what do you do, the things you do.
Mm-hmm.
There's a distinct thing that happens because people make choices, right? People make like real choices or implicit choices, maybe even.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and we could even go into where I think CTI is going. That's a different discussion. But I do think there's a lot of implicit decision making, and I think there needs to be some kind of capability that actually informs decision making.
Mm-hmm.
Well, newsflash, intelligence has been around for like 3,000 years or so.
Yeah.
It is not new. It is not, novel. It is just tried and tested techniques. What we see today is just different applications of that in a context of cyber.
Yeah.
And I genuinely think that this is the people benefit from knowing these techniques. And maybe good to mention, I did not work in the public sector. I do not have an intelligence background. I did have a long-time interest in these topics.
Mm-hmm.
I still have the recruitment number of a certain government agency in my telephone, for example. But it's more about, I think this is a very smart thing to do, that when you make a decision, you have to be informed. And this is a good way to guide that.
And a key element of doing intelligence is to reduce uncertainty and helps and support decision maker make decisions at the best of our ability, so they can make the best decisions, the most informed decisions, basically.
Amen.
So that's right up there with you, buddy.
Amen. But I do want to comment that is not that may seem so logical, but it is still not happening all the time.
No, it's not happening at all, in my experience.
Exactly.
You really have to come in and kick down the door and try to make them implement certain things so we can actually help them better. But we'll talk more about this throughout the conversation. Have you done any type like SANS course or other type of training in terms of where intelligence has been like a key part? I know like SANS, the CTI course has half of it is intelligence focused and the other half is more practical, hands-on on using, the diamond model and other stuff. But what are your experiences with that type of training?
Yeah, so my experience is I try to at least every single year I try to do a form of training. And that could be specifically on a security analysis technique or whatever. Or that could be a more generic training like the SANS CTI one, which is 4 or 5, 7, 8. I forgot the exact naming. But the thing is, I think these are definitely valuable courses. But what I've always learned is the more you learn, the more you know that you know actually less, right? So I always try to figure out like what don't I know, more or less, and actually zoom in on that. And to give you an example, right now, for example, diving deeper into scenario planning and all that. That is a lot of the stuff I do, but there aren't any good courses on that, which is fine. So then that means that I need to either make my own, which could be interesting, but also that tells me something about this industry. And that the application of these techniques that have been tried and tested for almost 100 years, are they widely adopted? No, they aren't.
In the intelligence community, we do use them a lot, or I did use them a lot, and I know other people I speak with are using them a lot in the intelligence community. I mean, with foresight analysis, where scenarios is a huge part of the whole process. And to do a little short plug on my own, I teach foresight analysis as part of the training I do with Fearsons, which is sort of the author of the big book, Structured Analytical Techniques book, the SAT.
By the way, can I just mention that I absolutely love that, and it's just a big part of what I do every single day. But it's just interesting that me as a non-Intel background person just takes up that book and can actually work with that. That back in the day, but I think that is the value of showing how valuable that is, right?
Yeah.
And I also want to say that there is definitely trainings on that, but it's usually packaged up in like this wider Intel analysis bundle.
Yeah.
And that is sometimes difficult.
Yeah.
Like there isn't like a specific thing. But anyway, the main question was what kind of trainings and expertise and all that. I think there's a lot of training and there's a lot of different applications, but you do see the tendency that it comes back from the intrusion analysis history.
Yeah, specifically CTI,
Yeah. And I think that, and then maybe we're cutting corners and going towards the future of CTI a bit, but I do think that is significant. That is telling us that there's a technical thing happening where I think that we need to move more towards a decision-making thing in the future.
Yeah.
So I really expect, and I want to make a controversial quote here, if the CTI industry does not change the way they're doing it now, they're going to be obsolete in like 2030.
Yeah.
And I think that the best chance we have as an industry is moving towards more explicit decision making and enabling those decisions in whatever role that's going to be. I don't care. But I think that is where this trajectory is going for the next couple of years.
We're going to have I have some questions later as well in terms of AI and the development of CTI and Intel and how AI will disrupt or change this and in what way, shape, or form. But we can dive into that in a couple of later questions. So if I remember correctly, you have your own consultancy firm. You're running your own business. You're an entrepreneur. At what level do you usually work? I mean, are you most at the strategic level? Are you also, are you the full range all the way with the operational, tactical, and technical? I mean, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I sure can. Can I name drop the company? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. I work. I've set up a company called Venation, and the idea behind Venation is that Venation is actually the pattern in leaves. And it's a pattern, it's a flow, the nerves basically. And for me, it's a great metaphor of, in our industry, we're looking at the one thing where it started, and then it breaks it down, and we try to piece all the different pieces of the puzzle together. And that's what I'm doing with Venation. And specifically, we're building scenarios to help people tell good stories, and basically work on that, and give them content that they can use right now. As part of that, we do implementation support, and that could be helping teams operationalize all this. Like today, we had a workshop on threat landscapes, how to build one. I think that is a big part of what I do, and what the team should be doing is just going out there, sharing their knowledge, and just sharing as much practical knowledge as we can.
Yeah, and you taught that workshop today here at
the
first day of the
first day,
conference. Yeah. Nice.
It's pretty cool, and we basically go over some stuff. But again, this is just one little task we have in the big, all the things that we do in CTI. And I try to make sure that I help people explain it to their stakeholders correctly in different layers. Yeah. So that means that I communicate on a daily basis with very technical folks. Yeah. But it could be that the other day I'm working with the chairman of the board, talking with them about, how do you condense all these 50 different reports? How do you condense that in a story they can actually use? Yeah. And I can tell you this, there's a couple things that are consistent, but there's a couple things that that are completely different.
Yeah, I can imagine. And when you experience this, as you said, you can one day talk to a really technical person, the next day is the leader of the board. Do you have any, have you had any like aha moments when you look at both the differences and the similarities between like the technical and the board member in your experience or in your consultancy? I mean,
yes, definitely. I would already argue that, well, not argue, but I would already say that one of my key skills is being able to translate from the different layers in the organization and be really comfortable and pivoting from that. I think that is what makes me good at what I do. I also think that is why these workshops, for example, we present today at First, are successful, because they teach that experience. I'll give people examples on that. But yeah, there's definitely different things that happen. And one of the things I'd like to call out is people, the different one, for example, the difference between having time. Nobody has time, for example, but people have priority. That's what it's about. Again, conscious decision making. And what I've learned is that there's a lot of stuff happening in the CTI space. Well, in cybersecurity in general, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things happening every single second of the day. You know, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that constant flow? And this is just one example. There are many, but that's some of the things I then work about with these with exactly those people.
Yeah,
dealing with that, dealing with the constant flow of information, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So through your job, do you generate intelligence or do you consume intelligence? And how does that look? And how does that translate into something you do for your clients?
Yeah, there's two angles to that. We primarily work on open source intelligence. Funny story. I got back in 2015 or something. I got a training from Arno Reuser, who's like the OSINT, the guru of the Netherlands.
Yeah, he still is. He's European now.
Amen. Mm-hmm. But I think he's basically the one who set up the entire OSINT branches in Europe.
Yeah,
and probably further. And what his training was so valuable to me, because I'm always interested in how do you collect information, where does that come from, and all that, and how do you structure that. I learned there that actually, if I would be doing anything else, I would probably be a librarian, because I just love the fact that I can categorize and tag and all that, and store stuff in the library. You know, I learned that over there. So different branch in the multiverse probably. But the thing is, that taught me that a lot of the stuff we work on in our industry is really freely available. And that, yes, there are so many things that aren't directly available, but actually a lot of it is.
Yeah.
So I set my team out to actually work on basically the open source intelligence that is available to us, and then produce on top of that.
Yeah.
But there's obviously a cutoff where people then, so my approach to things is give people stuff that is 80% good enough to work with, but not 100% accurate. Mm-hmm. And that is because then they've spent, enough time to do the basics correctly so that they can spend their time on customizing everything towards what they need to do. And that may sound stupid, but I can tell you this, that is where the most value is for these modern people. There's so many information available, but not curated content. Mm-hmm. And that is where I think also from the private sector the perspective, there's this, you grab intelligence from a technical vendor or whatever. Mm. Is that really intelligence? Is that really, let's be honest, is that really intelligence?
Yeah.
Or but also from the public sector, if you actually pull it from different sources and you go through the collection process and all these different slices, at what point does it become intelligence? So I really try to work on the open source intelligence. That is just what we do. It is not fancy Googling. There's definitely some analysis happening, following some of the analytical techniques you teach about. Mm-hmm. And then basically on top of that, we produce something which can be used in intelligence, but not necessarily as that.
Yeah, and that's actually really interesting because a lot of the people I speak with don't differentiate between OSINT and OSINF. Mm-hmm. So the OSINT intelligence is actually open source, where it has gone through assessment and analysis and source evaluation, etc. Where OSINF is basically just gathering data, maybe summarizing it or drawing a line between point A and point B and point C, and then call it intelligence, where there's no added value, there's no intelligence assessment, there's no process. It's just, this is what I think, and let's send it.
Yeah.
We see that a lot with in the old days in CTI. Is give us all the IOC feeds, give us everything we need.
Yeah, exactly.
Then there was no context.
Yeah.
It was just an IP. No, why is this dangerous? Why should we put it in our firewall? Where does it come from? What date? When was it last seen? There was nothing. Now we have come quite a bit further on that. But the Reuser guy, Reuser?
Arno Reuser, yeah.
Reuser, he actually said another thing, and that was he has a tendency to ask the group a question and then just stop asking or speaking. And then you see people furiously Googling, downloading the internet and just trying to figure out what to do with it. And he's sort of, after a couple of minutes, say, okay, guys, stop. What are you searching for? For what purpose? For whom? What am I going to use it for? What do I need? This whole intelligence dialogue thing where stop and think, then make a plan, spend a little time to save time, and then go really laser focused so you can answer the question at hand, rather than, getting everything and then nothing actually really matters. Which I think is really, it's so spot on.
Yeah, and we actually saw that today in the workshop. So in the workshop, there's a part of where people go through the process, and there's a couple of things I always highlight. One is that there's a difference between collection and analysis. That's pretty cleared up in the public sector, but that isn't really clear for the private sector sometimes, and that has to do with priority. People, for example, I was once coached somebody who came from the public sector and transitioned into private sector, and they landed in some kind of corporate gig because pays well, looks good, I have this big background, blah blah blah. But the thing was, they landed in a situation where it was like, okay, so tell me, where's the collection analyst? Well, no, you are the collection analyst. Okay, so I'm doing collection. But who's doing the analysis? You are. Oh, and by the way, you're preparing the briefing. Oh, by the way, you're doing the interviews as well. It's like, what do I need to do? Everything,
Welcome to the private sector, and specifically CTI. I do
exactly. Yeah,
I am the one-man army, and I do everything.
Yeah, but we are creating exactly. Yeah. We're creating one-man armies, and we have to prepare people for that.
Yeah,
manage the expectations, and that is difficult, to be honest, for some. But that is, I think, where we are, and I really love the fact that the example you just gave. That's exactly what you, in an exercise setting, see happening. It's like you just tell them, like, spend 5 minutes on collection, spend 1 hour or whatever. Spend 5 minutes on collection, spend 15 minutes on analysis, for example.
Yeah.
Because you right now, gathering information is so much easier than 15 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
But, even better than 50 years ago, whatever. But the thing is, if there is so much information out there, and you can query an LLM or whatever on that, then you have all the information at your fingertips. So the question is, what do you do with it?
Yeah.
That's an interesting distinction, I think.
And you mentioned something about prioritization a couple of times already. You are your own boss, so nobody tells you what to do and what to focus on. You figure it out, I guess, through interaction with the community, with your existing client or potential new clients. But how do you decide what you should focus on and sort of steer your organization? Because you can change on a dime if you want to. But how do you make that decision on why type of thing?
Yeah, I think there's two things I'd like to bring up here. One is I'm a constant learner. I'm always, and that apparently that was already present when I started working. I once did a big screw up in an engagement, and I wrote like 1.5 pages of feedback on myself, to get better about what I did. Where the partner was like, "Dude, why did you?" 2 sentences were also good. Good job. So I'm always interested in learning new things, and like the Muslims say, if you point at one thing, there's 3 fingers pointing at you. So I'm always conscious about, if I point to something, that I need to be able to tell about that first, and understand that correctly. And there's a couple of things I learned the last couple of years. Is I've been working with people who are very extensively involved with small feedback cycles, specifically Special Operations Force people, ex-Special Operations Force people. Because I saw that the way they do exercises, the way they plan for stuff, that is pretty. I wouldn't say that what I'm doing is a Special Operations Force, just to be clear for everyone, right? But there's a lot of similarities about the type of work I do, where you plan stuff, you test stuff, and then you get on with it. But the one thing that stuck with me is the way how intrinsically they innovate, they improve, Something is, you plan for something and it fails the moment you start doing it. So how do you do with that? So you have to adapt constantly. So I work on the idea of extreme feedback loops. So constant improvement all the time.
Yeah.
And that is the same mentality I ask of the people I work with, the teams I lead, and they will definitely not, work on that same caliber. And I have people in my team who deliberately do not work in that speed, literally to, I wouldn't say slow me down, but like to artificially create a moment of pause so that we can actually think, reorient, improve, and move on.
Yeah.
So these are just some of the things how I deal with that situation.
Yeah. So in terms of working with the scenarios, right? We haven't talked so much about what you do, but maybe you should tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Yeah, I could talk a bit about that. So there's obviously the stuff you want to do and the stuff you are doing, right? So there's a lot of what I'm trying to get to is what is that 2030 vision and how can we support that? And right now I'm basically helping teams fix the storytelling bit. It may sound fake and ambitious or whatever, but I'm helping teams model out attack trees, deciding which scenarios are more important than others, helping them model that out, and basically prepare for that. But that because you're organizing stuff, you're researching things. You also get asked like, "Hey, we just had a bad situation. Could you help us and fix that?" And then I also do some consulting on that, or my team does it, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of stuff that we see happening. Some of how intelligence is used, how intelligence is generated, and what are the differences between different things, different stakeholders, as I just mentioned. I think there's a lot we can talk about, but there's my real focus is on getting this Intel thing going, especially helping people do better storytelling and giving them something which is actually in between perhaps a big consultancy firm and a technology firm. Trying to figure out what is in between. And actually there is, which is what I found.
Yeah, and this is your niche. This is what you...
Amen, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Amen.
So when you generate your deliverables, I'm not just going to keep it a little open so you can talk more about what those things are. What are the typical consumers on the other end? I mean, we talked a little bit about it. I mean, you said sometimes it's the board, sometimes it's the really highly technical person. But I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what is the process for you to decide whether or not you're going to focus on A rather than B? Yeah. Again, it's the whole Intel thing I'm really trying to latch on to, I guess.
Yeah, I think the way how I have adopted the Intel cycle is not as a thing you have to comply to. I don't care if people work with a three-step Intel cycle, a 5-step, a 6-step, a rotor, or even as Arno Reusel put it, a propeller, where it actually goes through the middle. But my thing is what I've learned is that there's different layers of abstraction on the content we actually talk about with people. CTI traditionally has been talking about the technical stuff. And over the last decade, we saw more talk about actors, which is exactly because actors do stuff. People do this kind of thing, right? They write in the codes, they generate the hashes. But what I've learned is something interesting. So what I've learned is there's different layers of abstraction when you go through the organization. Well, that makes sense, right? But this is exactly the difference I see with the people I meet in the board. They don't care about this extensive report. That's the impression. But the thing is, they are actually more interested in the exact details. But the thing, we aren't helping them guide through these details in a pyramid shape. Things like bottom line up front, summarization. Why do you think that, with use of LLMs, the summarization feature is so good? It's because people don't want to read long reports. That is in fact wrong. People want to learn or read long reports, but they just wanted to understand at what point this is interesting to me, and I will go through that and I will read that in significant detail.
That is the key point of the bluff. Tell the reader right off the bat what this is about and what you need to know. And by this is also the way for us to drag the person in so they can read more. We want to entice them to read more. That's one of the core functions. One, to summarize, but other to say, these are the things that might be interesting to you.
Yep.
You should continue reading to get more information.
Amen.
Right? So you make the reader make that decision when they start reading the first couple of sentences. You only have a few sentences before they go, meh, or they go, oh, this is...
Exactly,
This is really relevant for me.
Can I add one more thing on that? So one of the things that makes what we do very successful is not necessarily that our Intel is perfect or whatever. What makes us, where we had a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of great success on, is being very visual. It's not just about doing the right thing and having the right detailed, finely nuanced content, because if nobody is reading it, then who cares?
Right.
So you got to make that first impression count. You got to make sure that first impression hits the mark and basically is saying, this is something you want to read.
Mm-hmm. And when you generate stuff like this, have you had situations where you nailed it and yes, you really hit the mark? And do you have situations where you failed miserably, and how did you regain, regain composure, or how did you learn from that?
Yeah, so my approach to the business I have right now is having real-time feedback loops with whatever it is we're working on.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the implementation systems we work on is exactly curated on a daily, weekly basis, because it's actually the things we use in practice. And if you actually share a template which you are using, then things go wrong sometimes, right? Things go extremely well, but what people don't see is there's a lot of failures that, I was going to say another F word, but there's a lot of failures that happen to get to that point. It's difficult for me to pick out one, but I see this journey as a journey of constant failure.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of screw-ups I've made over the years.
And this is where growth happens, right? You
Exactly,
learn,
yeah, exactly. And what I think is important is anyone listening to this right now and thinking, I want to do that, I want to go, I want to fail. It's not really about failing. It's about, as a leader, creating an opportunity or a room to safely fail, right? That there is psychological safety. People can actually make mistakes and don't get fired instantly.
Mm-hmm.
That has to do with a lot of things, geopolitics, internal politics, whatever. But then there's also the act of failing itself. And sometimes you have to, as a leader, you have to have a plan on what happens when you fail. And that will inevitably happen. So I try to at least make sure that I set up in every engagement I do, that I set up an environment in where it's okay to fail, that there's a plan if we fail. But also how can we learn from that? And how can we change that paradigm again? And that is pretty difficult for a lot of teams. For me, it is on a daily basis, talking about stuff, talking about what I do every single day, on a weekly basis, sharing that in a newsletter. That is me writing up the screw-ups I made that week, talking about it. What did I learn? And sharing those small things. I'm not perfect. I don't pretend to be. I don't know all of it. But it's if we compare all our notes, then we're probably going to get pretty far.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
So that's maybe not answering your question directly, but that is how I approach at least the art of failing.
Yeah, and speaking of failing, right? So at least when we recorded this a couple of weeks back, there was this whole thing with Oracle, and then a user on the forums claimed that they had breached them and they had evidence, and then a company came in and sort of said, we confirmed this, but nobody else could confirm it. There was a big mess.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on not this specifically, but surrounding this issue where we have a company denying, we have a company saying they have evidence, but there's a lot of counter evidence, and basically it didn't reduce uncertainty. Right? It created a big mess.
Yeah, so obviously I have an opinion on what happened there, but I will keep that to myself. But I do think that it is very interesting to see what happens. How do I put this? It's interesting to see what is happening beneath all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, in this case, you saw pretty textbook responses on certain things. And it's interesting because of the textbook responses. And I think we every time the listeners and perhaps you as well, you go to a training, you learn the textbook stuff, and then you learn there's an incident, you have to at least do the investigations. Is it something specifically that has happened? But sometimes, even though you do everything right by the book, it is still perceived as bad.
Yeah,
and that is just how humans work.
Yeah.
And I thought the example you're referring to now is irrelevant what the example is, but this is something we still see happening all the time, is about fundamentals and understanding that, even for, insurance reasons, you have to work on doing a proper response and having a politically correct thing. But, again, coming back to failure, I've seen teams do remarkable screw ups, like company almost failing screw ups. But because of the way how they reacted and responded to it publicly, taking the blame and all that, they actually got better out of it.
Yeah,
so I think that is a key part of learning and improving along the way.
Yeah, I totally agree. And going a little bit back to what you said before, I mean, obviously, it seems to me at least that you are applying the intelligence cycle or process in some shape or form.
Yeah.
You talked about direction, understanding your stakeholder, how to communicate well with them to figure out what they need. And when we get into the collection part, what is your approach to source assessment and information evaluation? Basically, the Admiralty scale. Do you use that type of thing to assess sources before you start working with your processes, or?
Yeah, I've heard that at first there's going to be a talk about the Admiralty scale.
Someone similar to me, with just as little hair that you have, a little beard, but not the glasses though. But yeah.
No, it's. I think so when we do source assessments, I gotta come clean. We don't do that perfectly, but I think there's an approach to that. I think that you need to do that. I think you have to categorize where you pull some information from. I think you have to do it. Do you have to instantly start with the Admiralty scale? Well, you can. Should you? No.
I think it's more about being conscious about what sources are you using.
Exactly. Yeah.
Have you assessed the reliability of the source, and do the critical thinking? Your buddy comes over and say, "Hey, I see you using this profile which has no background. Registered 2 days ago, making a claim. Are we sure we should use this as our only source when we start publishing? Maybe we should try and figure out a way to get confirmation, or at least be really clear that this profile we can't confirm it. So it's like somehow we have to communicate at least that, we're making this assessment or this conclusion on really thin grounds, right? So we're clear with our readers.
What I think is missing in the current industry is basic critical thinking.
Amen.
And I think that is you say amen, but I know you think so because you're talking about this, you're sharing that, and you're giving the example of the.
I am a walking bias on this, right? I am pro what you're saying.
Yeah, no, but I think it's. I just want to make sure that people understand that this is definitely a thing, and especially in the age of AI and all those challenges, it's pretty difficult to figure out where something came from.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, you need to have a unique understanding of what you answered something. Did you know where you pulled it from?
Mm-hmm.
That creates, this AI approach. It will create complacency, and you always need to be mindful of that. And I think the Admiralty Code is a great way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And you can work with that. There's Excel files you can use. Dare I say it? I don't necessarily appreciate Excel files being used as a tool or whatever, but there's definitely stuff that is useful for that.
Mm-hmm.
There is, it's integrated in vendor products. It is integrated. You should integrate it into basically everything. But
it's a part of MISP. So malware information sharing platform is there, so you can start using it. And at least when you start reporting, you should have some sort of discussion, at least to do with your colleague, or have someone come over and critique and try to be critical on what you've done, so you can sort of cover the basics and in crossing the T's, dotting the I's type of thing, where critical thinking is just that. That is the core essence. You just nailed it. So I'm like, I'm fine with this. I'm going to buy you a beer afterwards.
Well, and one more thing, I've seen also teams that just started out, that they just started adding the Admiralty Code to their deliverables. And then, they have people, stakeholders, like executives, they present it to them. And then the first question is, what the hell is B6?
Mm-hmm. So, and this is an important part, right? So usually what I say is there's a difference between what's under the hood of the car, how everything works, you and I know, but the driver who comes in should just sit, click on the start button, decide where to go, and have a smooth ride.
Yeah.
How the wheels are turning, how the electricity is working, how the software is controlling, he or she does not care. So if you're using a B2 or F6, he or she should know that.
Yeah.
When you write your report at a higher level, it should be explained your issues with the source. When you write at the technical level, you should have the A1 to F6, in my personal opinion at least. That's how we do it in terms of best practices. Yep. Right? So I'm not championing that you should do that to everyone, but you should have a conscious decision of, are we using this source for this report? We need to make sure that we're not overlooking or simplifying a more complex situation, and we could be dead wrong. And if we're wrong, stakeholders will lose respect, lose trust, which is the death of the work, and they won't trust you anymore. And that's a bad place to be in if you get caught with cutting corners too much.
Yeah, if okay, I want to add one example on that, yes, and that is it is not about the valuation of the numbering exact, but that is also actually an opportunity to talk about it. And what I mean by that is, if you have a completely unreliable thing, but it looks pretty legit, like a post on Telegram, maybe that is worth something. And that is worth a conversation about, is this actually something we're tracking? What do we do about it?
Yeah.
And I've seen this happening time and time again, where people then say, well, let's not do anything about it. Who cares? But knowing and consciously deciding to do that, that is definitely happening too little, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And some of the things I think we're trying to do in my organization, at least, is to, when there's something new, there's some profile claiming, but we're not sure yet, we'll start communicating that this has popped up.
Exactly.
We're unsure about the source. We're trying to figure it out, but we wanted to tell you and warn you because you're using the technology, or you're somehow, this might hit you through the supply chain, whatever the case might be. So we can at least get them going so we can start collecting. And if they're saying this is really important, you need to focus on it, well, then we're not going to do these 4 things. That's going to, delay. I don't care. We need to do that right now. Cool. We can then reassess and readjust all our resources so we can start focusing on something that's popping. But we still have our ongoing deliverables, but we have to do the expectation management of, we can do certain things, but we can't do them all.
Yep.
What do you want us to prioritize? And I think that's a key element in having in that good conversation.
The core aspect of this, which I'm seeing in the industry, is one, critical thinking. And I think, when you think critically, you eventually will end up at the Admiralty Code and all the stuff and certain ways and techniques and whatever. And I think, again, I want to reiterate, that is so important. I have a daughter, and I'm happy to share that, but she's now at a certain grade where you actually see that they get in touch with media consumption, and where they cannot distinguish if what they see in a certain video is correct or not.
Yeah.
So they challenge you, and I know the people listening, and perhaps you as well, they will recognize this. It's like they ask you a question like, is it okay to brush your teeth with wood? Something super random because they saw somebody stupid do that. But that is where we are, Yeah. Do you then need to classify a stakeholder like a TikToker on B2 or whatever? No, doesn't care. Yeah. It's about having, and this ties into what I think should be the skills that people will need the next generation of Intel analysts should have.
We're going to talk more about AI, but I want to jump in with AI right now because this is relevant right now in this topic. And that's, with AI, you get a summary of, let's say, 5 reports. The reports might have varied quality in terms of source assessment and sourcing with no sourcing at all. Yep. And you get an AI to start summarizing everything for you. Now we're getting into an interesting problem where and when I talk about AI right now, I mean LLMs. I'm actually talking about the large language models right now in this context. And we see a lot of testing with organizations and also individual analysts using LLMs to summarize certain things to give to the stakeholder much quicker. And my question often is, what do you know of the source material that enables you to point out what's wrong, what's added, and what's missing? Oh, but the LLM is doing it. Yes, but OpenAI and others are openly saying that a high percentage of what the LLM is summarizing is wrong.
Yep.
The LLM is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's calculating statistically words to put in sequence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's not it's not factual. It's just generating a description. So how can you verify and be sure that the information that it's gathering and summarizing for you which is meant to look like a human wrote it. That is a feature. And when you trust that text without critically assessing the information, I think that's where we're going to have a little issue until the LLMs actually the coding can make the LLMs actually figure out that this is something that I can't find a source for. We cut it out.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, I always, I once saw the example of that the LLM is actually the metaphorical dog that is talking to a human, but it's barking in a way that the human understands it, right? The dog doesn't understand it, but the human does because it's human language, right?
Yeah.
And in a more technical term, you just described it already. This does the calculation and predicts what kind of thing that comes after it, and it's getting better. It's getting better. Currently, the projections are that by 2027 we'll have artificial general intelligence, which is probably almost the same or better than the smartest human on Earth. It's going to be interesting. A whole different discussion happening on that as well. But I think for getting that for the future, getting that to right now, you still have to check your stuff. Yes, everybody has done it. They have to just quickly do something. They just, for the sake of it, they just added something in the LLM and just summarize it. Probably fine, probably good enough. So what I learned, at least in this process since 21, that's interesting to share, I think, is there is a lot of, I've been doing summarization since before we had LLMs. And I was pretty good at it because I used to write a lot of long reports, and then people were like, dude, write shorter. So it's like pat on the wrist, talk shorter, do shorter. So actually I learned learning the hard way, like summarize. And I gotten pretty good at that. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But I think what I learned also is that is pretty hard. A good summarization, having the right understanding of these nuances, and especially in Intel briefings, where you need to make sure that you have covered all the nuances, right? And then how do you roll that up into two sentences? That is pretty hard.
Yeah.
And then not even going into how do you then make sure that you verify the information. In the context of AI and LLMs, I do tweak my personal prompts also in a way that it actually has certain sources associated with it, so that there's an explicit phase of where you got it from, what is the references. And actually, there's some interesting stuff you can actually do with it, because you can also challenge it to challenge their own thinking or its own thinking. But that is the sort of thing we should be doing. We should be thinking about, just like Arno said, we should be first thinking about what we want to do. Where do we get it from? Are these sources vetted? Yes or no? And that is something that now happens in a heartbeat.
Yeah, it does.
And it happens so fast, and it's happened so good. It's like, that I really enjoyed the fact that they, for example, we're now, I don't know when this podcast goes live, but we're now at the stage where OpenAI, for example, deliberately delayed the response of a prompt because it was giving prompts so quickly that
people didn't trust it.
Yeah. And that's actually something more interesting happening, and it's not necessarily related to your question, but I'm seeing that right now is like there's obviously a certain copy of text which often occurs. And what is so fascinating is that copy of text is they basically loaded obviously the data of APA and certain, how do you write titles, how do you write text, and they compared all sorts of stuff. Again, this is applicable to all the LLMs. It doesn't matter what time we read or listen to this, but it's so interesting that we now see the same text occurring in different pieces of deliverables. But the fact is, this is actually how you should write it.
According to standards. Yeah.
According to the standards. So again, coming back to what we talked about, doing textbook stuff and doing it a textbook correctly, but then still it feels off. That's what humans do, right? So the interesting,
we make that individual adjustments that make it human, right? So yes, we're following a standard, but it's with my words and my connection of words.
Yeah.
And when you read an LLM, often it's the standard way. You can read like a 2 or 3 paragraphs, and I go, what I just read and what is the context? What am I supposed to pull out of it?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of fluff, right? When it gets a little excited. But it doesn't get excited. But anyway,
but this is also close to your question on how to do the summarization and all that. And I think there's a lot of summarization that doesn't happen correctly.
Yeah,
and I
see that too.
Yeah, and I think people that just use it for consistently for summarization, please, I encourage you to not do that. Because I think that, I don't think, I know, because I've tested that thing to the limits, and I know exactly what they put into it, because that's how a model works. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, you're better off summarizing yourself and then summarize it again. And what is interesting is you'll probably probably get to the same text, but different nuances. And again, these nuances are the things that an executive will pick up on instantly, and that will be the change of, in today's AI-driven world, but that is exactly how we taught ourselves to write. Yeah. And all of a sudden somebody else is doing it, or something else is doing it, and then it's not good enough.
And actually, I saw an interesting research. I don't have it at the top of my mind, and I have to see if I can find it again, because it was like passing in one of the doom scrolling on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
there was a research that said, if you are getting a report and it says 100% written by AI, and then you have another report which is supported by AI, and the third report is 100% human, which one would you trust more? And if I remember correctly, I'm paraphrasing, but nobody, a high percentage did not trust the AI, the 100% AI. A little bit more on the supported by, if it was a human, they trusted it even more. And that's an interesting thing, where you have all these organizations charging for the AI do everything, and people don't trust it if it's 100% AI.
Yeah.
So there needs to be perhaps a human in the loop for the time being. This will change as we all get more comfortable with it, but it's going to be interesting to see.
I'm expecting this, so I know the kind of questions you want to ask, but I think the one of the more interesting things that I think will happen in the skill set of modern CTI folks, and transitioning towards 2-3 years into 2030, there's going to be, if this trajectory keeps on going, there's going to be at 2027 something in your pocket which is smarter than you, which is smarter than everyone. It's going to have
remembers everything at the fingertip, or actually smart and thinking and
everything, every element.
Years.
I'm making this claim right now, so
it's on recording.
So we can do this. So I forecast that. Obviously, I need to do some more substantive, but it would be cool to do this thing in 2 years and see where we are, right? But my point is, I'm not sure if the question is not if that happens, that will happen. But
it's just a question of when.
The question of when, and how do we respond to that? How do we deal with that? And the traditional sense we see since the humans were just existed is we are a very, I was going to go again. I'm maybe going into a bit of a philosophical right now.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of stuff that we always are conscious as the human race towards other things that could potentially threaten us. And this is what you see happening in this example, where we, even though that it says perfectly correct in our own words, how it should be, exactly to our standards, exactly to our things we do, and then we still don't trust it. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think it's immensely interesting. But I'm going to be interesting to do this in 2 years and see how this goes. A key point I want to finish off with in this segment, at least, is metrics. So we've done everything, right? We've generated everything. We're giving it away to the stakeholder. They're going to use it. How are we? And I know this is one of your, one of your key topics you love to talk about. So I'm going to set off the next 10, 15 minutes on this before we sort of finish off today. But what are your thoughts on how can we do in CTI with Intel and everything, metrics and measure value and demonstrating value of everything we do? Because I want to say one thing is that too often we get to the point, we get questions from stakeholders, right? Well, nothing happened. Why are we paying you all this money? Because nothing happened. And that's an actual dilemma where you're wrong because you're right. You did everything right and they paid you for it, and because nothing happened, they start questioning you. And that's an interesting thing, and it ties into the question of metrics and value. And so, yes, take it away.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a topic close to heart. Not because I'm a very scientific person, but I just think it's interesting that when we try to measure something, something interesting happens. And you see it on first grade. We educate our people how high they can climb a tree, but how do you compare a monkey versus a goldfish? How do you compare that? And that logic still applies to this day. How do you have a person on the autistic spectrum? How do you map that person's performance on somebody who's extremely social? And maybe in the team we work in. Similarly, what does any person do in their daily life, and what is the impact of that? And I think there's a couple things I do in this field, obviously, but I think the essence is I'm trying to tell people that there's a difference between activities and impact, and these two segments are fundamentally different. Excuse me. I think that no, in fact, I don't think so. I believe that there's a lot of focus on activity-based metrics and not a lot of what the impact actually is. That is because we find it fundamentally hard to talk about impact. It's about those subjective things sometimes, like what you talked about. You've been doing all the things right, but there wasn't any hit on the Intel platform. Did we do the wrong thing? Should we cut budget? That is what's happening, But my point is, if you aren't able to have that conversation about impact, try to measure that and work on that, then you will fail from the start. You can start with activities and then move on. So that is how I approach this topic in a nutshell. What I'm doing about it is a couple things. So back into 16 to 17, I saw an amazing talk at the CTI summit from SANS, and I thought it was great. It was just some people sharing their approach to metrics, and on a wild Saturday, I was like, let's turn this into like a one-page Excel file, something really simple. And that actually got like amazing attention. And it wasn't about that it was on one page, but it was so simple. Mm-hmm. And to this day, I still curate that thing. Actually, I'm working on some stuff right now with the CTI CMM team to contribute some of that knowledge into a wider, community orchestrated thing. And I think that is probably where this should live. Not one contributor works on that, but I think this is also one of those interesting things, right? So I curate this because this is just the stuff I see happening. I tested it and stuff didn't work. I cut it out and then I just update it and I put it up for grabs. People could do with it whatever they want with it.
And I did. I mean, that's how I got to know you. I saw the post you did, and by chance, I think, and I reached out to you, and we had our first conversation like in 2018, 2019. I can't remember what it was, like 5 years ago at least, just around or before COVID, I think. Yeah. So that's how you and I got to have conversations, and we do this every year. We have a summary. What's going on with you? And I don't know what's going on with you, and then we talk about all the things that we've been doing. And I actually. When I did my talk at SANS, I also actually referenced you and the two ladies that you used as a baseline, right? When I talked about my conversation at that conference, which was about how we do metrics and how are we going to defend or produce some sort of result that this management can actually see and understand and actually be able to see the value of they paid this money and made this investment in this people or this function. This is the dividends. This is what we get back.
Amen. Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And we see a lot of whenever organizations are trying to save money, they will start cutting insignificant jobs in air quotes. Mm-hmm. And sometimes cybersecurity are unfairly affected by this. And I think one key thing we can do as a community is try to demonstrate and visualize more the work we do and the value we provide. But then we need to be more engaged with what the business is doing rather than sitting in our little cave and talk about all the indicators. Right?
Exactly.
Those are two different worlds. So we need to be better at communicating this with the rest of the organization.
So let me give you another example from the conference today. Mm-hmm. So obviously when you, as a professional, I always recommend you to go to these kind of conferences just because of the LobbyCon, the people you meet and all that. And it's not just what you talk about, but it's like there's subtle nuances you sometimes pick up upon. And I was just having a conversation with somebody, and that person told that their employer is really looking at how to automate as much as we can using Gen AI or whatever. But the conversation we talked about is like exactly like it's the same thing with trying to run while you can't even walk. It's like you're trying to automate something, but did you actually thought about the process? No, process is boring. Let's skip that phase.
Oh.
And this is very unpopular for a lot of people, and especially for some of the more tech savvy folks. It's like, let's load everything into an LLM because then we can quickly query it. Yes, that is certainly true. But my point is, I think that we should be able to understand what is the process we're following. There's always a process that you follow. It's either an inexplicit or an explicit one. And then afterwards, you're going to be able to actually automate whatever you want with it.
Yeah,
and that is how I, for example, in my own team, I understand exactly where there is automation needed, but also where its usefulness ends.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point, right? This is where it ends, and we need to agree on it so we can sort of figure out what to do with it next or do parallel to this. And I think the AI train is moving. You need to get on it somehow. And
exactly.
Somehow, or in any shape or form that's viable or at least relevant to you. But at the same time, being critical. And I know we talked about this before, so I'm not going to talk about it now. But that's one of my pet peeves. I like that we use new technology, and we have in context of intelligence. In the old days, there was people walking with the paper. And then we had people on horses, and then we had with ships. But there's new technologies that always shorten the time from incident to decision, or at least where decisions need to be made. And now we're talking into, well, how can AI take over a lot of the simple decisions? That's a different conversation, though. But before we had like pen and paper and like a library card deck, right? Now we have databases, we have Excel, where we don't do anything manually anymore. We do a lot more and more automation, but all the data sets and everything into databases, the time from something happening to us getting it and actually getting good analysis results are really shortening. With AI, that's going to shorten even more, and more automation and more machine learning involved. I think that's a good thing. It's when we try to force in LLM and stuff that's not good enough yet, and then trusting it. That's where I'm getting the whole issue of I'm not sure we're down the right path on that one. But in 2 years, we'll see. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, mate, I'm telling you this. So if I would ever do a master's degree, it's not going to be technology. It's not going to be business. It's going to be philosophy. It's about, where we're heading. We need, we need to be thinking about what we're thinking and how we're thinking, and how we can transition that into the next generations of analysts, and perhaps also our children. Yeah. And that is, because we are humans, we have to make that, we need to track that over time. Talking about things in 2 years, there's also a time metric.
Yeah.
But again, if I want to, I think metrics are important. Going back to your original question, metrics are definitely important. But I think, this is just something where, what is the impact we're making? We need to get really a good handle on what is the impact we do, and that will set us apart from, technologies like an LLM who can do things tremendously faster.
Yeah, it can.
Change the game.
I think another thing that related to this with AI, and then we'll finish off the AI sort of topic here, is that now that we're using a lot of the people around us are using LLMs to learn stuff, right? So the old way, or the best way according to research, is to read and write and think. So thinking is writing, writing is thinking. But if you just feed it a document and it tells you what it is, how is that affecting our brain in terms of learning and retention, i.e. how long are we going to remember stuff, and how is that changing our way to be critical thinkers or thinkers at all, because we can just ask something and we get the answer rather than having to do something ourselves. I realized while I'm thinking about it, and I've done this before, but the counter argument is when the calculator came, that was the same discussion.
Yeah.
Oh, now you can just click, and you get the answer. You don't have to do the math anymore. Oh, this is going to be terrible, going to destroy people. We manage really well with calculators around us all the time now. So I think we as a human race will adapt. But I'm still a little curious of how we are going to respond to not the dumbing down, but, it doesn't require thinking anymore. But I might be the old geezer, in the peanut gallery at the Muppet Show, and just hurling my fist around. But
I think you're still right, man. I think really this period where we're in now, this is just one of those significant change periods, and we had the same discussion with the calculator. We had the same discussion with the introduction of the telephone. All of a sudden, you can call people at the other end of the country. How do you know that's secure? We had the same thing with the steam train. When the steam train got introduced, they probably had the same thing when they figured out fire. I mean, there's always going to be innovation. There's always going to be that. But what matters is how we deal with that.
Yeah, there's always going to be friction, and I applaud that one. It's about how we deal with it and figure it out, how to do the best with it as we can. If anyone wants to go into cybersecurity or CTI, what do you think they should think about, prepare? You mentioned, I think before, training or education, not necessarily do one or the other, but somehow there are some formal demands, if you will, or requirements from certain agencies or certain companies. What are your thoughts on, what are your tips, I guess, to people who want to go into CTI?
Oh, man, I definitely got some ideas. That's for sure.
Let's be radical.
So I think I'd like to start with different personas. So there's obviously the people transitioning from a job field into CTI. There's also the students starting, and there's people already in CTI. I think what we often see, people transitioning into CTI, they're just trying to understand cyber in general. Like getting versed in technology, getting versed in how that fits in the cyberspace. There's a lot of information available on that, and that can help you learn the exact words they're using. If you pivot from intelligence work, if you pivot from behavioral psychology, if you pivot from having a maternity leave for like a period, you're taking care of the kids for like 2 years, you can still come back into this industry. Let me be very clear. But I think the question is always like, how do you keep up with the knowledge, the phrasing, all that stuff? I think that is difficult. But that said, there's so many open source information available, so much information available, so many courses out there. Which some of them cost a fortune, some of them don't. Some of them should cost a fortune, and some of them don't. And I think you would be surprised what kind of knowledge you can find just open source. Now, getting into this industry, it sometimes is even harder. So I because of the way how I organize my team, we work in a contributor model. And where we work with people across the world that they basically they work some time a month for me, just a couple of hours, just some freelance stuff, right? But the interesting thing happens is that's a good place to start for a lot of people. For example, one thing I didn't know about when I was a certain age is like you can do summer internships at certain companies, right? I did not know that. That is a normal thing. Everybody knows that right now. Probably everybody listening to this knows that.
But would you have done it when you were 16 or 14?
If I would have known it, I would definitely have done it.
Yeah.
But I think why I didn't do it, that may be good to stop. I wasn't thinking about all of this at that point in time.
Right. That was me 16.
Well, the thing is I was working. Don't get me wrong. I was doing holiday jobs and stuff. But I realized when I started working, it was like, wait, my employer is recruiting for people and I'm paying like the double I was earning at that point in time to do the stuff, a little task I'm doing now. I'm like, what? Why didn't I think of that? And I punched myself in the face, like, why didn't you do that? But I think that is also about, new generations, doesn't matter which one, they will have... Not everyone is already thinking ahead like that, Not everyone is thinking about what is the next thing, where did they want to go. And I think our educational system should also support that and look towards how are we going to guide people through that journey. The knowledge is abundant, so it's not a question of knowledge. It's about motivating somebody to consume that, educating people how they can deal with changing information. How do they deal with vetting sources? Well, they probably we're going to call it something like media experience or something like that. But well, that's a bit on how I think about that.
Nice. So if you were to talk about, through your career, at least from my perspective, I have certain key dates and years where good shit happens because there was right people at the right time who opened the door. And it's not, it's always the case of, you're given advice or whatever. What type of advice were you given in any time, from you were a kid until today that you remember, and you remember the person and the situation? I have 3 people I know that I want to give a hug every time I meet because they steered me in the right direction, which made me do what I do, and I'm here right now doing these things, having fun. Yep. I'm not sure if you have any of these like aha moments or like, oh shit, yeah, that person told me something that actually I've taken with me.
Yeah. There's I can I have the same situation. There's probably a couple people I can right now name that I could definitely pinpoint to. How I want to answer that is there's definitely every person has people in their lives who are influential, and probably the question is, will you recognize it in time? Sometimes you recognize it later in life, right?
That's what happened to me. I recognized that certain people at certain times were instrumental in shaping my future. And I've gone back to all of them and, told them this and given them a hug, and sincerely, because, there are certain times in life where you're not stranded, but you're not deciding on anything and you're unsure and stuff. And suddenly someone shows you with a torchlight where to go type of thing. I'm using a lot of metaphors here, but it was really, it touches the soul sometimes where some people doing good things for you.
This sort of stuff, and just I recently did because I'm a lifelong learner, I did a course with ex-Special Forces teams. And one of the interesting things was it wasn't really about the physical aspect, but it was about the mental aspect. And the mental aspect is looking back. What are the significant milestones happening in your life? And you basically get to do an exercise where you think about, everything that happened in your life and how does that transpire. And actually, I encourage everyone listening, to actually do that exercise and think about actively like what happened. And that is something that not always happens. People are sometimes afraid to look back. Is that a bad thing? No, And I think if you allow yourself to be vulnerable, to have that experience, then you'll learn that there's more people. There's actually a couple people that made a significant impact on your life. And we all have them. Yeah. We all have those people, and that's awesome. And you hug them, as you say. But I think I can tell what they told me, but it's irrelevant. But the thing is that you recognize that you recognize that you on the journey you're on as a human, that you will recognize what is in front of you, but also what the thing that you already did.
Yeah, what led me here, right?
Exactly. Yeah. What is the impact you left behind, right?
And I always try to. I'm not sure if you have or are going to, but I try to. In Norwegian, we say like send the elevator down. So if you're fortunate enough to get ahead in life, help someone else out, on your journey. Because I've been given help by other people, either by their decision or just by chance. I don't care, but by somehow helping others than when you yourself are in a better situation to do so. And I think that's a beautiful part of being human, right? So, yeah, thank you for getting a little deeper with me at the end now. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time. It's been awesome, and looking forward to having this discussion again in 2 years and talk about AI.